Alright, so today's project is going to be something called cache. It's a project that they did in the CS50 Introduction to Computer Science course out of Harvard in their problem set 1. So let's go take a look at that. And as you may guess from the screen here, it's got something to do with coins. And basically what this program does is it takes an input from a user, a float input, okay, monetary input with decimals, and calculates the least amount of coins that you would give back to a person. So of course, once we get as many quarters as we can and we get down to below 25 cents, then we give them dimes. Once we get below 10 cents, we give them nickels. Once we get below 5 cents, we give them pennies. So in the implementation details, it says we're going to get a float from the user. We're going to make sure that it's a non-negative number, so it has to be greater than 0. And then we're going to calculate basically what I just set up here. All right, so let's go back to our IDE and create a new project here. And we're going to start by getting input from the user and ensuring it's a float. So if you remember to do that, we create a variable name. I'm just going to call this C for coins. And then we set that equal to an input from a user. All right, but we cast it to a float so it looks something like this. All right, so we cast it to a float. Get the input, change owed, that's the prompt to the user, and then they enter a number. And to test this, we're just going to go down and print out C. Alright, just like that, and if we run it and put in 4.34, of course we get 434, but now the problem exists that if we put in a negative number, so if I run this again and put negative 434, it returns that as well, and we don't want that. So what we're going to do is the do while loop that I showed in a previous video. We're going to do a version of that. So we're going to do while true. All right. And then we're going to prompt them. Then we're going to check to make sure that they give us what we want. So if C is greater than 0, we're going to break out of this and continue our code. And if not, it's going to keep going through this loop. So let's go check that now. And if I type in negative 0.01, of course it prompts us for another number, so I'll put in 0. Prompts us for a number because it's got to be greater than 0, so I'll put in 0.01, which is a positive number. And as you can see, we break out and it prints C. All right, so that's one of our challenges, and like I say, this is a great way to get the exact information that you expect from a user. All right, so let's continue down here. So the next thing I'm going to do, because one of the things I've learned over the years of doing programming is anytime you can avoid messing with decimal numbers, do it. So we're going to change C into an integer, and we're going to do that by doing C equals, and then we're going to cast it to an int, and then C times 100. All right, because by doing this, you're now taking C times 100. So if you take anything in the monetary value, especially with two digits past the decimal place, and multiply it times 100, you're going to get a whole number or an integer. So to test this, let's go ahead and run it. we'll just put in that 0.01 again, and we should get back 1. Alright, so that's basically what we did there. And if we put in anything, like if we put in 50 cents, so if I run it again and put in 0.50, I get 50. If I put in $1.50, or we'll just say that 434, so 4.34, I should get 434. And this also helps you from having to use like other functions like round and things like that. Okay, so we have a integer number here. So that means when we're talking about a quarter, we're no longer talking about 0.25 or a dime, 0.10. We're just going to use 25, 10, 5 for a nickel, and 1 for a penny. Okay, so how would we go about getting all the quarters that we can get out of an amount entered? All right, and we'll just go with that 434. So we know that there's 4 quarters in $1. So 4 times 4 is 16. It's 34, so there's one more quarter, so that should give me 17 quarters. So I'm going to go in here and create another variable up here to count my coins, and I will just call it counter. And of course set that equal to 0. Then I'm going to come down here and say if C, and then our old friend modulo 25, all right, because we're talking about quarters. So we want the remainder. So no matter what we put in here, we want to get the remainder of that divided by 25. So if that is less than or equal to 25, then we're going to do something in here. And what are we going to do? We're going to update the counter. So counter, and we're updating it. So we don't want to overwrite it because we're going to have to do this with the dimes and the nickels and everything. So we're going to add to whatever's already there. And what are we going to add? C divided by 25. And the reason we use the double divided by is we want to ensure that we get an integer back. Then, of course, we have to update C. Okay, so we're going to set C equal to C modulo 25. Alright, and what that's going to do is whatever the remainder is, which here it should be, what did I say, 434? So it should be 9 cents because we should get 17. And let me go ahead and put the counter down here. Alright, so we're going to print out the counter. And if we get 17, that should leave us with 9 cents left over. In fact, we can do that by doing a plus, and then another concatenation there, and then C. Alright, and we're probably going to have to string counter and C, but let's go ahead and try it and see if it runs. Change ode 4.34. And yep, that's what we need to do. We got to string these just like that. Let's rerun it and try this again. 4.34, and we get 17 with 9 cents left over. Okay, so our count, or our counter, is 17 so far with that number. Then we need to come down here and figure out our tens. Now here you don't want to use an if-else or an if-else statement, because what's going to happen is it's going to come in here, and if that's an if-else, it's going to go through this and then break out of the loop. So what we want to do is just do another if statement. In fact, what you could do is just copy this, Control C, and then Control V, and you could do that. That would be your dimes, your nickels, and your pennies, and then just change these to the appropriate numbers. So dimes, and I'll stop at the nickels. Let me go ahead and get rid of that, because basically anything else that's left you could just add to your pennies. I mean, that would be the short way to do it, or you could go in and figure out your pennies if you wanted to. But let's try this and see what we come up with. And we'll do the 434 again. And now it says we have 18 and 4 pennies left over, or 4 cents left over. Okay, which if you think about it is true, because we got 9 cents left over after doing the 25s, which means this isn't going to be true, so it's going to jump down to this. So if 5 is less than or equal to 5, which it is, then, or I should say C modulo 5 is less than or equal to 5, then we're going to go in there and pull out our nickel and add that to counter. All right, and there's only one because it's 9 cents. And then we're going to set this to C equals C modulo 5, which is 4 left over. So what you could do here is either have another thing down here where you update your counter. So counter equals, or I should say plus equals, C. All right. And then from there, you could zero out C. So C equals 0. All right, and this should give us the count, and we'll check it here in just a minute. So let's do that and do the 434 again. It says we got 22 with 0 left over, okay? And of course, we didn't do any calculations on this. We just set it back to 0. But we did on this one, so counter, which we said was at 18, we added C to that, which there was 4 left over. And if you figure it out, 17 quarters, 1 nickel, and 4 pennies is 22 coins. Or another thing that you could do is, since we don't really need to do this because we're not here to print out C at the end, we could get rid of this and just say counter plus C. And if we do that, we don't have to string it because we're not joining it with a string. And now if I run this, of course we get 22 back. Now I'm going to go back over and check to make sure that that's what they wanted, was just the number. So as you can see, yeah, it says change owed, and then you put in a number, and then it just spits out how many coins it would take. All right, so I believe that we're done. And I always recommend checking it with a few different numbers. So let's run a big number. We'll go with $56.13. And it says 228. So if you take 56, multiply that by 4, you'd get 224. All right, and then of course we got 1 dime in there, 225, and 3 pennies, 228. Another thing that you might try is something small like that 1 penny. So let's go back and we'll rerun this. Change owed 0.01. Of course we get 1. If we do 0.06, we get 2 because a nickel and a penny. All right, so it seems to be working, and that's how you do cash. Thanks for watching. We'll see you in the next video.